Welcome, everybody, to the next episode of the Cannabis Review. I'm delighted to be joined on this episode by Dr. Jeffrey C. Raber, who's the founder of the Werc Shop. He founded the Werc Shop in 2010 with a focus on botanical analysis, new product development, and sustainability. And he is currently serves as the executive director on the Association of Commercial Cannabis Labs. So, Jeffrey, how are you keeping today?
I'm doing very well, thanks, Owen. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you very much, mate. I've been looking forward to talking to you for some time now. The more I've researched you, the bigger the intro was getting, and the more there was to learn. So I'm kind of basically going to jump into the first topic as opposed to doing a big intro of how you got into this industry, and we
Far
can
preferred for me.
yeah, we can just start at the first topic. So, how to test cannabis. So, for those who don't know, Jeffrey set up his company in 2010 with the aim of being a cannabis testing facility in California. Is that correct, Jeffrey?
Yep. Yeah, we were right in Los Angeles, and at that time, everybody's like, "Wait, you can test cannabis?" But the first question we got, and the answer is yes. Yeah, you can test it just like every other plant, really.
And so you were kind of one of the first people with a PhD in organic chemistry getting into cannabis at that time. In terms of the capital for setting up the lab, was it an expensive overlay, and was it something that took a lot of time? Or with your experience, were you easily able to put together the kind of equipment and the personnel required to do such a thing? Because I could imagine it runs into seven figures if you're to do it nowadays.
Yeah, it was very interesting timing, right? When we did it, we raised $150,000 in capital. Half of it went to the down payment of the HPLC. The first big decision we had to make was what analytical equipment and tool do you use? Do you use a gas chromatograph or a liquid chromatograph to go analyzing cannabinoids? The liquid chromatograph's a little bit more expensive, but it gives you the cannabinoid acids and the neutral cannabinoids, so you get a better picture, a more full picture of exactly what you're holding in your hand. And while it was more expensive than the gas chromatograph, more expensive to buy and run and maintain, we chose that one, and that took most of the capital. But to get started, then it was a little over six figures. Today, it easily approaches seven figures. You'll need about $1.5 to $2 million to start a lab today. Pesticide testing alone, that equipment's about $750,000, and that's just the equipment, not the people or everything else around it to run it.
Yeah, and that's it. The more I got into the research, you sometimes take for granted the ability to be able to, let's say, test cannabis, but then you start to get into the kind of molecular science part of it and the different chromatography types that you'd have, and whether you're analyzing terpenes or cannabinoids. So it does become a very complex issue. And we'll move kind of on to the next topic because that's kind of where you started. The next thing I wanted to talk about was the chemical fingerprints of cannabis. So you guys were the first kind of analyze the first few hundred or few thousand strains in California. How did that process start for you guys, or was it a natural progression and evolution of the company?
Yeah, it was. We started in 2010, right? We're testing cannabinoids, and you just start to see all these cannabinoid chromatograms look very, very similar. You can almost stack them all on top of each other and say they're identical. And while you're not seeing possibly everything there, they're very, very similar. Yet you're hearing very different effects. You smell that the products are different, they taste different, and you start to say there's something else here that's driving their differentiations. It's not, if I see 10 products and they all have 22% THC, there's something else that's driving them being different. So we literally followed our nose and our chemical nose and started testing for terpenes. And we did so in 2011. We were the first commercial effort to go ahead and say, you need to test for these other molecules that we'll call terpenes. And everyone thought we were just trying to charge more for testing. There was next to no importance for it. But lo and behold, after 6 months of giving it away and putting those values on labels and product labels, we heard dispensaries saying, hey, there's really something here. Too many patients are coming back to us and saying, I don't like the highest THC value. I like the one that has, beta caryophyllene or limonene at the top. There's really something going on with these terpenes. Fast forward to today, I think more folks are finally embracing the idea that terpenes are a major driver to the entourage or ensemble effect and are really important in what types of overall effects you're getting from the cannabis you're consuming.
Okay, and that kind of leads me perfectly onto the topic that I'm going to spend the most time talking about in this episode, which is the blends and the formulations. The more I've started to research this industry, you kind of start to realize that within time, the isolates and the individual cannabinoids are going to be with education and marketing and advertise are going to be blown out of the water by the blends and the formulations. And it's something that you seem very ahead of the curve on. The number of intellectual property I came across, meter dosing and cannabinoids, cannabis processing, terpene composition. So this is something you see being a major part of the industry over the next decade, say.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and I do think we're kind of on the cusp of really starting to understand it. I think, unfortunately, we've always named the products the same from the cultivar, right? So if I have, let's say Blue Dream, right? I have the Blue Dream flower. Well, someone says, here's a Blue Dream live resin, here's a Blue Dream vape cart, here's a Blue Dream topical. But all of those compositions are wildly different. They may have, started from a plant that somebody called Blue Dream. We're not even sure we all know what the exact same Blue Dream is. And it became very, very clear to us that there is a lot of chemical changes and chemical transformations that happen when you extract the compounds. So I might start with the exact same plant, but what do I get when I'm holding an extract of that? And it can be wildly different if I have a CO2 extract, ethanol extract, get it down to a distillate, a live resin extract, even a rosin pressed extract. All of those things end up with a very different chemical composition than what the plant produced. So I think we've all started to kind of understand, and there's been some excellent work by Ruth Galili in Israel and some others that are starting to say, hey, these things called terpenes and other minor cannabinoids are important in our cannabis compositions. And you can look to something like Marinol or even single isolate CBD like Epidiolex, and folks are saying this is not as therapeutically useful as when I have a whole plant composition or something that has more of the plant's components. So isolate molecules and high purity molecules are super helpful tools and very valuable in building composition. But goal to be, how do I make these compositions more like what the plant presented, more of what I was offered to begin with? Most of the experiential effects that we're told about are through those that are consuming either vaping or combustion of the plant material or even directly eating it. But those are the molecules offered from the plant, right? The plant grew those, it expressed those and said, here they all are. When I extract it, I've lost some, I've changed some, right? Those cannabis derived terpene sweets, maybe 40 to 50% of what remains is what was actually originally there in the plant, but you've turned a lot of other things into different stuff. How do you go from here's what the plant provides into a vape cart or some sort of extract product that says, this is what it would look like if I just magically was able to just convert THCA to THC or CBDA to CBD, and everything else is the same, minus, cellulose and amino acids and some other stuff that I may not want. And I think that's, what our approach has been. How do I take as many individual components and build up a sophisticated and consistent, able to be consistently produced composition so that anytime I'm getting the same product to market and I can infinitely scale it. So I think it's really unfortunate to folks that have medical needs and you say, here's this product today and we'll call it Blue Dream. And then a month later they come back and they said, that stuff really helped me. And I got, can I get the next Blue Dream? But its chemical composition's wildly different and it doesn't help them the same. I think that's, there's almost nothing more cruel than here's some medicine that works and then I can't give it to you again. So it's really, how do I go and approach making these compositions exactly the same every single time at any batch and any scale so that once they are successful in the marketplace, whether it is medical or adult use, that will be able to be reproduced and able to be provided time and time again so that the same people can use it for the same reasons.
Yeah, I think the reason the epidiolex and the single component things, as we know, lawmakers aren't the most intelligent when it comes to making specific decisions. So I think that was the most palatable option. It ticked all the boxes in terms of legislation, but the companies that follow behind, and I can see this almost like chef recipes to a degree. There's such a multitude of combinations and so much R&D that needs to be done, that there is so much space to run for companies that enter into this space with the right personnel.
Definitely, definitely. I mean, it's funny. I talk to lawmakers. They ask for help all the time. Where you see new legislation about hemp or new analogs, and you say, "Hey, look, there could be the potential problems." And the first thing that the lawmakers or the legislative staff and aides say is like, "Look, I did poorly in chemistry. I don't know any math. Please don't, make things technically difficult for me." So your point of it was easy checking all these boxes. I think that's absolutely right, but unfortunate because you're going to throw away a lot of the good value that cannabis has to offer. the beautiful part of its complexity is that it can help so many folks. But the challenging part of the complexity is, how do I find the right things for the right folks? And how do I consistently produce something that is highly complex time and time again? And I like your analogy with the chefs, because I think that's right. We all have a palette now that we can start to play with and start to put these compositions together. You can even layer on top of it for other flavorings or other types of product experiences. But you really want to do that the same every single time. So how do we do that in a scalable fashion? I think folks are still trying to figure that out, but that really is going to be, how do we introduce cannabis in consistent manners to the broadest amount of people so they can get their benefit time and time again? And I do feel like we're really on the cusp of starting to see more folks begin to do that, and that we have technologies and tools that enable us to do so.
Yeah, and I'm sure you're aware that over in Europe here, it's going to be pharmaceutical led for the first initial few years. It's a lot different over to North America. So, do you see a scenario where companies over here are able to create individual synthetic cannabinoids and blend them together with terpenes? We've already talked to Ilan Sobel in Israel, who have already made full glandular trichomes in a bioreactor and have made mass scale of it. So do you see that as an ability to happen, or do you think it has to happen with the flower as the original ingredient?
No, I think you'll see all of it. You'll definitely see those biotechnology approaches. There are some interesting avenues of that that can be very scalable, right? It's not going to freak out the authorities or the lawmakers if you're doing it in a bioreactor, as opposed to acres and acres upon area that someone might want to, come and grab your plants at the wrong time. Whether that is more economically efficient at those scales or not is an interesting question. I think that still remains to be seen until we can ultimately scale it fully. But just like the food and fragrance industry, you see all of those tools and technologies apply. There are some that are great for pharmaceutical use. There's some that's good for food use, and kind of the in between dietary supplement. I think you can see cannabis across all of it. So
Mm.
you can certainly start in the medical side and go down the hardcore pharmaceutical path. That may be more expensive, more cumbersome and restrictive on some compositions, and that might not help as many folks. But if that's kind of what gets the door open and allows people to feel more comfortable with this type of tool to the physiological systems, then so be it. We'll have to take that path. But I do see all of those technologies probably having some sort of role in some place. Which ones will ultimately win out? I think there's consumers for all of them, right? We have some of these folks with their high purity bioisolate, biosynthetic isolates, and they're great tools. Like, they can be useful, but some of our state systems are not really amenable to allowing them in the dispensary path. There's legislation or regulation that make those difficult. So they're playing in some states, but not yet in others. But they might play in the federal system because that one's pretty wide open here and doesn't have all the rules fully fledged out for it. But I mean, you see it in food, and I think that's probably a common place to say, what might cannabis look like? It's going to look like food plus dietary supplement plus pharmaceutical, kind of all mashed together, or some sort of version of those, all along their own individual paths, because you can get them through each one of those.
Yeah, amazing. It's been hugely informative. The last thing I wanted to touch off, I was recently reading there that California have revamped their the laws surrounding the cannabis industry. Am I correct in reading that? Was there a whole new?
There was a little bit of new hemp legislation. There has been some
Okay.
new laws relating to testing inside the licensed dispensary system as well. So, and there's going to be continued evolution. There's a lot of complaints about taxes. There's not enough access via dispensaries in California. It is a very difficult challenge for licensed operators to combat the illicit market out here. It's almost a 5 to 1 ratio of illegal operators to licensed operators, and the licensed ones pay tax. They have higher operating costs because of regulatory compliance and testing pieces. And while that product is clean and assured at the shelf, it's definitely not able to compete in a price sense with all the illicit market. And I think it's going to be a while till we can straighten that problem out, unfortunately. But it really needs to come through proliferating access, more access points, and lowering the cost via lowering the taxes, or giving some sort of tax reprieve for a short run, so that you can kind of say all of it now operates inside the licensed legal entities.
Yeah, well, even over in Dublin, Ireland, we realise, and I've heard numerous stories about the taxation in the Californian industry. So hopefully that gets to change for you guys in the
It's
next year.
it's pretty rough to see the receipts coming out of the dispensaries. You're like, wow,
Yeah,
all of this and that was the tax. You're like,
yeah,
wow.
it
It's
break your
yeah,
heart.
it's a challenge.
Well, we've reached the time limit. I could actually talk to you all day, Jeffrey. Thank you very much for coming on the show. It's very much appreciated to take your time. For anybody who wants to check out the workshop, the link is there below. I highly recommend doing some more research and checking out all Jeffrey's other work. Hopefully, we get to chat again in maybe a year and see how things are all going over your stateside.
Yes, more than happy to come back. Thank you for the opportunity, Owen, and thank you all for listening today too. Very much appreciate that.
Thank you very much again. Chat to you next episode.